This is CR Change Request, your structural brief for Friday, May 1st, 2026. Today's read covers 8 signals: voting rights, the shutdown, the Federal Reserve, retirement accounts, housing, healthcare logistics, vaccine guidance, and airline consolidation. Let's start with voting rights. On April 29th, the Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's congressional map in Louisiana versus Calais. The surface read is that the court found the state's use of race made the map an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. The dissent called it the latest chapter in the demolition of the Voting Rights Act. Within hours, Louisiana suspended its May 16th primaries. Within an hour, Florida passed a redrawn map projected to net Republicans 4 additional House seats. Here is the piece most people miss. Section 2 was not formally struck down. The court left it intact and added evidentiary considerations that make the standard nearly impossible to satisfy at scale. The statute survives. Its corrective capacity does not. If you have been watching this space, you already know the sequence. Shelby County took out preclearance in 2013, which was the preventive mechanism. Calais just narrowed Section 2, which was the corrective mechanism. The architecture of federal voting rights enforcement now has no front door and a nearly closed back door. Both rulings left the underlying law in place. Both removed the operational function that made the law protective. So what should you be watching for? Watch coordinated mid-decade redistricting in Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Watch the Louisiana primary calendar and overseas ballot timelines. Watch which advocacy organizations pivot from Section 2 litigation to state constitutional challenges because the federal lane is now structurally narrowed. Preclearance fell in 2013. Section 2 became the remaining mechanism. Yesterday, the court narrowed that mechanism to the point of structural inutility. The map is not the story. The enforcement architecture is. Let's move to the shutdown. President Trump signed a bill ending the longest partial shutdown in American history at 11 weeks. The disputed enforcement-related funding for ICE and Border Patrol moved into a separate reconciliation track. TSA officers received retroactive paychecks on March 30th after the executive directed DHS to draw on the One Big Beautiful Bill's $10 billion fund using a reasonable and logical nexus rationale. Coast Guard and DHS law enforcement were paid through the same mechanism. FEMA, CISA, and civilian DHS staff continued unpaid. The surface read is that the shutdown ended. The structural read is different. Shutdowns have historically ended because unpaid essential workers create political cost. TSA stops showing up, airports back up, the public reacts, Congress moves. That feedback loop has functioned as an informal check on appropriations brinkmanship for 40 years. Sit with that for a moment. What happened in this shutdown is that the executive selectively reprogrammed reconciliation funds to keep favored functions paid while letting less visible agencies absorb the operational damage. The administration chose which arms of DHS would feel the shutdown and which would not. The Anti-Deficiency Act remains intact. What changed is the executive's interpretive latitude over what counts as a logical nexus. So what should you watch for? The next appropriations cycle, the rate at which the One Big Beautiful Bill fund draws down, whether civilian DHS workers see retroactive pay before the next fiscal year. Each successful reprogramming creates precedent for broader executive discretion over how appropriated dollars are deployed. The shutdown did not end because the pressure mechanism worked. It ended after the executive proved the pressure mechanism could be selectively neutralized. Let's turn to the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell said this week that he will remain on the Federal Reserve Board after his chair term ends. His term as governor runs until January 2028. He framed the decision around Fed independence and concerns about legal attacks on the central bank's ability to conduct monetary policy. If you have studied this historically, you know the chair is the visible position, but the voting power lives in the Board of Governors. Governors vote on every FOMC decision. Reserve Bank presidents rotate. Powell holding his seat preserves a permanent voting position through January 2028, which is more structurally meaningful than a typical chair transition. His reference to legal attacks is almost certainly about the erosion of Humphrey's executor protections. If the court rules Fed governors are removable at will, his tenure becomes contestable. His decision to stay is partly a test case posture, not just continuity. Watch Kevin Warsh's early authority. Watch FOMC alignment. Watch the administration's appointment strategy for any open seats. Watch any litigation that tests removal authority over independent agency governors. The chair may change, but the vote is still infrastructure. Let's shift to retirement accounts. A Trump executive order expanding retirement account access for workers without employer-sponsored plans landed alongside Department of Labor proposed rules opening participant-directed 401ks to alternative assets. The proposal is open for public comment until June 1st and establishes a process-based fiduciary framework that could allow private equity, private credit, real estate, infrastructure, and cryptocurrency inside those accounts. The public framing is financial inclusion and retirement modernization. That is true, but incomplete. One policy widens the intake pipe by bringing more workers into account-based retirement savings. The other widens the investment pipe by allowing more complex private market assets inside those accounts. That is how household income becomes institutional flow. Think about what that means structurally. The retirement wrapper stays familiar. Tax treatment, account structure, payroll logic, ownership framing, all preserved. But what flows through the wrapper changes. More workers come into the system. More asset classes come into the accounts. More risk moves onto households under the language of access. There is a timing concern worth watching. Baby boomers are entering distribution while private market assets are being positioned for broader retirement plan access. That creates a life cycle mismatch. Participants nearing retirement may hold assets that are harder to value, harder to exit, and less transparent under stress. Watch participating financial institutions, target date fund design, default enrollment rules, alternative asset allocations, fee disclosures, liquidity standards, and fiduciary litigation. The 401k was never only a retirement plan, it was a capital pipeline. Now the system is widening the pipe and changing what flows through it. Let's move to housing. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate rose to 6.30% this week, ending a 3-week decline. The 15-year fixed rose to 5.64%. The surface story is another rate setback for the spring market. That is too thin. Energy shock moves into inflation expectations. Inflation expectations move into long-end yields. Long-end yields move into mortgage rates. Mortgage rates move into affordability, inventory, builder incentives, and household wealth access. So the deeper read is this: housing is now downstream of the Strait of Hormuz. A geopolitical fuel shock can move through the Treasury curve and land inside a buyer's monthly payment before most people connect the dots. Housing transmits monetary policy through 5 channels: affordability for new buyers, refinance access for existing owners, home equity extraction for consumption, construction employment, and builder activity. The wealth effect on retail spending. When rates move, all five activate at different speeds and for different households. That is why the lock in math matters. The rate protected household can stay, wait, refinance later, and keep accruing equity. The rate exposed household absorbs payment stress, mobility restriction, and regret. A buyer in Cape Coral and a buyer in Buffalo are not in the same housing economy. They share one mortgage rate headline. They do not share the same leverage. Builders are doing the affordability work the Fed will not. Rate buy downs, price cuts, closing cost assistance, inventory management. Affordability does not disappear. It gets financed by the balance sheet strong enough to carry it. Watch mortgage applications, pending sales, builder buy downs, assumable mortgage marketing, inventory by metro, and the all in cost of ownership. Insurance, property taxes, HOA fees, and maintenance have separated the monthly ownership burden from the mortgage headline. Policy efforts focused only on rates will miss the broader structure. The housing market is not frozen. It is a transmission system separating the rate protected from the rate exposed, and the gap is now structural. Let's shift to healthcare logistics. UPS reported a record $3 billion in quarterly healthcare revenue, with healthcare contributing more than 14% of revenue in early 2026. CEO Carol Tomei described drug delivery as an antidote to economic uncertainty. In the same window, Amazon Pharmacy announced same day prescription delivery expansion to nearly 4,500 U.S. cities and towns by the end of 2026, including statewide coverage in Idaho and Massachusetts. Amazon has also begun deploying prescription kiosks at One Medical clinics, allowing patients to pick up prescriptions immediately after appointments. These are not two separate stories. They are the same story told from opposite sides of the table. If you work in healthcare, you already see what is being built. Amazon is not only running a pharmacy, Amazon is building an integrated healthcare access stack. One Medical for primary care, Amazon Pharmacy for fulfillment, RX Pass for recurring generics, AWS for the data and AI layer. Amazon's logistics network for delivery, the diagnosis, the prescription, the pricing, and the delivery increasingly sit inside one ownership boundary. UPS healthcare revenue is built on a different model. Healthcare companies, specialty distributors, manufacturers, payer directed networks, and pharmacy benefit infrastructure contract with logistics providers as a service layer. UPS sits underneath the existing access architecture. Amazon is not trying to sit underneath. Amazon is trying to own the patient relationship, the pricing experience, the fulfillment channel, and the delivery layer. Watch UPS and FedEx earnings calls for healthcare segment guidance. Watch Amazon Pharmacy's RX Pass enrollment growth, prescription kiosk deployment, and same day delivery expansion. Watch whether more drug manufacturers sign direct distribution or transparent pricing agreements with Amazon Pharmacy. Watch federal and state regulators, because Amazon's One Medical acquisition cleared before the full healthcare stack was as visible as it is now. UPS is selling logistics as healthcare infrastructure. Amazon is selling healthcare as a logistics enabled subscription. The first model survives by remaining essential to the existing access architecture. The second is built to make that architecture less necessary. Let's turn to vaccine guidance. The Trump administration is appealing a federal court order that blocked efforts tied to cutting or reshaping childhood vaccine recommendations. A judge previously blocked major recommendation changes connected to Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the Vaccine Advisory Committee structure. If you have studied healthcare policy, you know this is not a fight, over vaccines alone. It is a fight over recommendation architecture. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is the operating layer. CDC adopts ACIP recommendations. ACA preventive coverage attaches to that adoption. Medicaid vaccines for children eligibility flows through it. VICP liability protection for manufacturers flows through it. Disrupt the committee, and you disrupt coverage, supply, and liability exposure simultaneously. The vaccine schedule survives as a document. What changes is whether it remains operationally enforceable, financially supported, and legally protected. Public Health Authority moves through advisory committees before it reaches clinics. Change the committee composition and the entire downstream architecture of insurer coverage, school requirements, pediatric practice, and federal program eligibility shifts without any statute being amended. Watch ACIP composition. Watch school immunization rules. Watch insurer coverage decisions. Watch states issuing independent vaccine guidance, since federal fragmentation is pushing schedule decisions to the state level. The Vaccines for Children program covers roughly half of U.S. children. Any change to ACIP recommendations flows directly into state administered healthcare operations. Public health does not only move through mandates, it moves through recommendations that become infrastructure. And finally, airline consolidation. United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby confirmed he approached American Airlines about a potential merger. American rejected the idea and said the deal would be negative for competition and consumers. The conversation surfaced amid fuel cost pressure tied to the Iran war and broader airline operating strain. This is a public test of whether the current administration's antitrust posture is materially different from the one that blocked JetBlue and Spirit in 2024. The DOJ position that emerges, formal merger filing or not, signals what is possible across telecom, healthcare, and other consolidation prone sectors. Hub overlap math at LAX, New York, and Reagan National is heavy. Any approval would force significant divestitures, which would create slot windfalls for low cost carriers and reset secondary market access. Pilot seniority list integration is the historical breakpoint for airline mergers. Without an early labor accord, the deal cannot close on the projected timeline, regardless of regulatory approval. United is Star Alliance. American is One World. A merger forces a global code share and frequent flyer reorganization that reshapes international access far beyond domestic routes. Watch DOJ posture. Watch DOT review signals. Watch hub airport politics, route cuts, slot redistribution, and alliance reshuffling. Watch tourism-dependent secondary markets and convention cities for early signals on access cost and frequency. Airline mergers do not just combine companies, they redraw the map of access. So let's bring this together. 8 signals, 1 underlying shift. Section 2 of the VRA survives as a statute. Its enforcement mechanism does not. The shutdown pressure mechanism survives as a constitutional check. Its political force is now selective. The Federal Reserve survives as an institution. Whether it functions independently is a separate question. The retirement account survives as a savings vehicle. Its capital function is being widened and redirected. The housing market survives as a wealth ladder. Its operating reality separates the rate protected from the rate exposed. Healthcare delivery infrastructure survives in name, but the control layer is migrating toward vertically integrated consumer healthcare stacks. The vaccine schedule survives as a document. Its operational enforcement is being routed through advisory committee composition. Antitrust law survives. The standard of enforcement is what determines whether airline consolidation proceeds. The common feature is venue and mechanism, not statute. Each fight is being moved to a procedural surface where opposition has fewer tools, less standing, and slower reaction time. The headline level is the noise. The operating layer is where the decisions are landing. And here is the corollary that runs through every item. Risk is being transferred from institutions to individuals. Voters absorb calendar instability and diluted representation. Federal workers absorb selective shutdown exposure. Retirement savers absorb illiquidity and private market opacity. Buyers absorb rate exposure and all-in ownership costs. Patients absorb access pathways shaped by who owns pricing, delivery, and data. Parents absorb vaccine research burden. Air travelers absorb consolidation cost. Today's instruction: track the operating layer. Repeal can be reversed. Inutility is harder to unwind. When a statute, institution, or product keeps its name but loses its function, the change is more durable than any announced rollback. Architecture survives, function migrates, risk transfers. That is where power stops being abstract and starts changing the system people actually live inside. That's the brief for today. Good to be in the room with you. Until next time, this has been CR Change Request.